Hey there, Dr. Mark here. I literally cannot open my phone up right now, go on social media without seeing a video of a shirtless doctor screaming about the dangers of seed oils. Which is why today I'm gonna give you a comprehensive review of seed oils and their impact on health. And honestly, what I have to say might surprise you. Let's start with what you need to be concerned with. Most critics of seed oils come from the low carb or carnivore communities or schools of thought. And what they're warning most people about is that seed oils like canola oil, soybean oil, or corn oil are the primary cause of inflammation, cardiovascular disease, and obesity. Now keep in mind this toggles between carbohydrates, sugar, and plant-based foods, or whatever the demon of the month is depending on who you talk to. And conversely, removing all of them will make your health problems disappear. And why is this the case? We're going to touch on the scientific evidence in a second and if it's even true, but they point towards the high levels of omega-6 fatty acids, primarily linoleic acid. The way these seed oils are processed through heating and bleaching and even deodorizing, and the prevalence of them oxidizing, which can be harmful, and less commonly, the way they're consumed, sometimes as a component of ultra processed foods, like fast food French fries, as well as other packaged and commercial baked goods, and much less fairly, the fact that they just come from plants, which again went from the best thing you can eat for your overall health, and honestly something that I thought we could all agree on, to literally the worst thing you could eat in just 5 years. But what does the scientific evidence say about eating seed oils? Let's go through the evidence, starting with its impact on inflammation. Many studies, both systematic reviews as well as randomized control trials, have studied the impact that isolated changes in these seed oils from cooking and baking have on inflammation. Essentially in these studies, when they control for someone's overall food intake, their calories, and their macronutrients, and they start to replace or exchange seed oils with other edible oils or other sources of fat, like saturated fat, they can measure what happens with the inflammatory response. And what they're looking to assess is what happens with those higher levels of omega-6 fatty acids, a type of polyunsaturated fat or PUFA that isn't necessarily bad for you. The most common one being linoleic acid, which is an essential fatty acid, but is typically consumed in larger than ideal amounts in westernized diets. And interestingly enough, eating more linoleic acid, or LA, which I'm gonna start calling it because I'm gonna say it a bunch of times here, has been one of the major dietary trends in the last 50 years, for the most part from soybean oil. And the cool thing is here, the more linoleic acid you eat, the more shows up in your adipose tissue. Is this a bad thing? Perhaps, but the main issue with this trend is the ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3 fatty acids, which are generally more desirable, which has long been thought to be the cause of increased inflammation. Ideally, this ratio would be closer to 3-to-1 or even 2-to-1 from omega-6 to omega-3, but it's typically 10-to-1 or even 20-to-1 in very highly processed westernized diets. This could lead to chronic inflammation, which in turn could lead to heart disease, metabolic syndrome, and even arthritis. The list goes on. Mainly because, and the mechanism for sure is a little bit unclear, the LA converts to arachidonic acid, which could be pro-inflammatory. But what happens when we study swapping out or swapping in these seed oils in highly controlled environments? Let's start with seed oils with the highest level of omega-6s, like soybean oil or corn oil that has around 50 to 60% of the calories coming from omega-6 fatty acids. A recent review of soybean oil, which is the leading and most commonly consumed seed oil around the world, showed that based on their review of 5 randomized controlled trials on inflammation, that soybean oil alone does not impact inflammatory markers or oxidative stress. And based on the high LA content of this oil, you would assume that would be the worst one. But this is a similar trend in seed oils with less LA content, for example, canola oil, that's around 18% of the calories. So there's no real impact on inflammation in well-controlled studies. So where is all the fear coming from? Seed oils first became widely consumed in the mid-1900s, and by the 1960s, soybean oil was the most commonly consumed vegetable oil. And by the 1970s, we had the emergence of canola oil as an alternative to other partially hydrogenated oils, which did include harmful trans fats. 8 of the most popular consumed and discussed seed oils are going to be the following. Okay, so I got the list here. We got canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed, grapeseed oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, rice bran oil, and peanut oil. And these are collectively known as the Hateful Eight by some. And canola oil, and I've never verified this, but I have no reason to believe it isn't true, but canola actually stands for Canadian Oil Low Acid. And understanding this may shed some light on why so many are concerned about seed oils. You see, originally it was created as an industrial oil with high levels of erucic acid, which is toxic. But those friendly Canadians did make an oil that was fit for human consumption, taking the erucic acid from close to 40% of the calories down to less than 2% in the canola oil you consume today, which removes the toxicity concerns, and as far as inflammation goes, it's generally anti-inflammatory. Okay, so one seed oil that isn't on the Hateful Eight list is going to be flaxseed oil, which is going to have very low linoleic acid at around 13% of its calories and much higher omega-3 fatty acid content coming from alpha-linolenic acid, which I don't know why they couldn't name these a little bit differently. If there are some meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials on flaxseed oil with no impact on inflammation when measured by CRP as well as interleukin-6, and in some cases the flaxseed oil is going to be anti-inflammatory, probably due to the omega-3s. So not all seed oils are the same, although they do seem to have similar impacts on inflammation. This still draws attention to why it's less than ideal to paint them all as the same and saying avoid all seed oils, especially when we don't consider how they're being processed or even how they're being used or consumed, which we're going to discuss later on in this video. Now, if you want a full extensive review of the impact of seed oils on inflammation, other science-based experts have done an extensive job and a great job of this elsewhere on YouTube. My favorite review of this is from Dr. Gil Carvalho on his YouTube channel, Nutrition Made Simple. If you want to check out the full video and dig a little bit deeper, I've linked it up in the description below. Now onto the impact that seed oils have on cardiovascular health. Now, just so we're all on the same page, when we measure the impact that nutrition has on a cardiovascular event, we typically assess blood lipids like cholesterol and low density cholesterol to get a proxy for plaque building up in our bloodstream, increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, if you don't believe that any of that is true, nothing I'm about to say is going to convince you otherwise. Feel free to tell me in the comments, but I'm going to try anyway. For the most part, seed oils that are rich in omega-6 fatty acids have been shown to lower cholesterol levels, especially LDL, when replacing saturated fat in the diet. Now, this doesn't mean that saturated fat is bad or off limits, but when you swap it out for seed oils, you do get a reduction in LDL. And this has been shown extensively in the scientific literature. Here's one review of canola oil on cardiovascular health. I was surprised to see Dr. Scott Forbes on here, who is a friend of the channel. I thought he was just a creatine guy, but apparently he's a seed oil guy as well. For the most part, what the science here still shows is that the balance between omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids is still important, because too much omega-6 without omega-3 may not provide the same benefits. But where consuming seed oils could be problematic for cardiovascular risk is repeatedly heating the oils under high heat, which we typically see in fast food settings when we're frying food. This could lead to a change in their chemical structure, which could be harmful. But you're probably getting the sense that a huge confounder here isn't just the oil, it's the processed food that you're eating. Either way, not the best to eat repeatedly fried oils, and it's also one of the reasons we're seeing some major fast food chains shift away from their use. But for the most part, when it comes to seed oils and cardiovascular disease, eating unheated or properly heated seed oils has a neutral or positive effect on cardiovascular disease. And again, it's hard to tease out the actual impact that seed oils have on these dietary patterns, which is also going to tie into its impact on obesity, which we're going to talk about next. The interesting thing here about the consumption of seed oils and other vegetable oils is that they're everywhere. And as energy consumption has increased around 500 to 1,000 calories per day over the last half a century, so has obesity, and so has the consumption of seed oils. The main issue here is that in isolation, seed oils don't seem to be inherently fattening, but the consumption of processed foods that contain the seed oils is, which is also going to be accompanied with high sugar and high fat, ultra processed and ultra palatable food choices. But it's not specifically the seed oils. I would love nothing more than to isolate the cause of obesity to one thing, like they do on TikTok, but it's just not the case. So that's the scientific evidence on seed oils, and for the most part, they don't seem to have a negative impact on health. So what's my recommendation as a nutrition expert and nutrition coach? Personally, I wouldn't be afraid of them, but I also wouldn't be quick to suggest to include them or eat them, especially when they come from highly processed foods. If you're gonna cook with seed oils, it's probably best to cook on low heat or use an oil with a higher smoke point like canola oil or grapeseed oil. And in most cases, cold pressed oils, which is a type of processing, may be be more healthier because it's gonna have more nutrients as well as polyphenols. And vary your sources of oils instead of eating and consuming one oil all the time. You're gonna get a better array of nutrients and nutrient profile this way. And if I'm going to pick the best oil to consume, I'm still gonna go with a non-seed oil and go with olive oil. It has the most health benefits. But overall, I wouldn't suggest that anyone should fear or eliminate omega-6 rich seed oils entirely from their diet because it's not necessary for optimal health. Being so focused on avoiding them to the point of mental distress is probably doing more harm than anything else, which is not what you're gonna find online. People want a boogeyman, something to put the blame on, but in this case, it's not seed oil. And when we find or discover that thing, you'll hear it from me. I will not lie to you. Now, if there's anything I missed today or you have questions or comments on, feel free to comment below and fill me in. And if you're completely new to the channel, don't be afraid to subscribe and hang around. Now, with that being said, if you enjoyed today's video, you're probably gonna hate that I did the carnivore diet. And next up, you're gonna learn why I quit the carnivore diet. Check it out right here, and I'll see you in the next video.